are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the opportunity to interview ST Tangirala. ST is the author of Havensbury, a young adult fiction book whose story involves a student who starts a business with the help of a homeless person. I'm here with ST Tangirala, who is the author of the book Havensbury. ST, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me on.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
So, my name is ST, and I'm the author of the book Havensbury and the host of the Next in Time podcast. And also, I am a IT consultant by day and writer and podcaster by night.
Without spoiling too much of your book, Havensbury, what is your book about?
So, Havensbury is a young adult coming of age story about a young prep school student who goes to school in Massachusetts, but because of the fact that he struggles to fit in that world of Havensbury prep, he goes out and then he meets a homeless person. And that homeless person guides him into starting a local business in the town of Havensbury, which in the end causes a major rift between the town itself and the main character against the prep school altogether.
Now, is your book self-published, traditionally published, or published via a hybrid press?
I've self-published this book on Amazon. If you want to check it out there.
Yeah, through Kindle Direct Publishing or KDP.
Yeah, through KDP.
An interesting tidbit about your book, one of the characters in your book is a homeless person. Why did you decide to feature a homeless person as a side character to the main character in your book?
One thing I want to say is that not like homeless people usually have this negative stereotype being this illiterate, dumb type of person. I wanted to showcase someone who had a illustrious life, but then ended up on the wrong side of things that made him homeless. And I feel like that type of experience that the homeless character is going through could be a good it could be a good way of, giving the main character the wisdom and inspiration to become who he is.
Yeah, you mentioned, now I don't hold any kind of prejudice against homeless people, but there are a lot of people who do. That's why I asked that.
Yeah, so it's not all. I mean, there are plenty of homeless people who could fit the mold of that type of the stereotyping, but in general, there are other homeless people out there that have just had bad luck in their lives, and that they're smart. There are strong, intelligent people who are savvy in life, but then they just had bad luck that made them homeless at the end. So that I wanted to highlight that part of the homeless experience.
Were there any real life preparatory schools that influenced the setting of Havensbury?
Well, Havensbury, it's primarily what you call Dead Poets Society meets Goodwill Hunting. So I kind of had that personal inspiration from going to, just visit. So basically, I went to college in Massachusetts, and it's kind of like an insular bubble in a way. And but outside the college, there was a couple of homeless people lurking around. So that kind of gave me that thought and idea of how I could make that book altogether. But yeah, most of the setting of Havensbury kind of comes from what you call the major prep schools here in the U.S., including Andover or Exeter.
Do you plan on writing more books?
Yeah, definitely. I'm working on a sequel to this to this book as well. But this is more about the main character 10 to 12 years later.
You host a podcast called the Next in Time podcast. What can listeners expect from a typical episode of the podcast you host, and what type of content matter does your podcast feature?
So Next in Time podcast. I've created this podcast back in 2022, so in order for me to be able to highlight people's visions and missions of what they're building and why they're building it. A typical episode consists of just getting to know them as a person, and then getting to know what they're doing, and then I start asking questions, more pointed questions as to what they're trying to achieve with what they're building. So it's kind of what you call like 15 minutes. If you're in the world of, investing in startups, you may know that the first half of the pitch is all about just getting to know the person, and the second half is more like getting to know what their venture is and why they want to, what they're building. That's where you ask all these pointed questions to get to know more about them.
You're a polymath who has worked in many different fields. What makes you a polymath? And other than your work as an author and podcast host, what different industries and fields have you worked in?
I've worked. I don't say, I call myself more like a polymath in training rather than an actual polymath myself, because I've yet to achieve what you call polymath status. So that'll take a lot of time. But yeah, I've worked across many industries, including food and drink, the insurance industry, the technology industry, and even now with the book and the podcast, the media industry as well. So it's like I've tried to understand. And also I've worked in real estate when I graduated from college. So I worked in sales in that, and I worked in marketing, I worked in media, I worked in technology. So I kind of feel like I've had that unique experience of trying myself in different areas and see what I like and what I want to excel in.
Do you have a typical writing routine as an author? And if so, what is that like for you?
A typical routine would be just making sure I write about at least 1,000 words a day. And every morning, when I wake up, the first thing I do before I even do anything else is to get myself into writing mode, because that's when I'm like the most creative in terms of writing. So I set the goal of writing 1,000 words, making sure I've completed it, or if I'm not working on anything writing oriented, I'm working on marketing my book.
Now, for a time you lived in Ohio, is that correct?
Yeah, for earlier this year, from January to May of 2023.
Mm, Uh, my final question, who do you consider to be the three most influential people in your life, and how did they impact you?
Three most influential people in my life.
They can be people you've met, or people you've not met.
Okay, well, would celebrities count?
Uh, yes, if you know a lot about them, and uh,
One of one of them will be Chef Gordon Ramsay, because he's like someone I look up to in terms of reach in, like, what do you call, excellence in craft. So he came from a background which was very itinerant, and he had a very rough upbringing growing up. But then he used that negativity and channeled it into something highly positive, and made himself a big name in the world of in the world of cooking. And I think another person I would also look into would be Kobe Bryant, the former NBA star who recently passed away. I was devastated when I heard he passed away, so that's kind of what I was personally affected by that. And because I known Kobe was someone who always goes out there and makes something of it, makes the big shots, tries to compete with the best, and always tries to make himself a role model to other people. So that would be my second person, and I think my third would be. It's kind of hard to think about a third at the moment. I think if I had to choose someone in the writing field, it would definitely be J.K. Rowling, because she was someone who went through hardship, but then she finally managed to write something very long lasting for the time, long lasting for all of us to read, which is the Harry Potter series.
ST, you were a wonderful guest for this podcast, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron.
I hope to be able to read Havensbury very soon. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACscribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.